Greetings, everyone. Thank you for viewing my channel. Thank you to the subscribers that I have. I'm very honored. So today I wanted to talk about my separation and divorce. This video is to be helpful to those that are in the process currently, and to those who actually have finalized their divorce, to kind of address these first, I would say, like 2 to 3 years of being separated and then actually divorcing. A caveat is, myself and my ex-husband, we did not have children together. So that is you're going to have to make adjustments to some of the information that I'm sharing. And I'll try to make those adjustments as I'm speaking, but because I'm speaking from my lens, I may not make those adjustments, in real time as we're speaking. But I will be mindful of that. But yes, we don't have any children together. It was an uncontested divorce. It was not high conflict at all. In fact, there really wasn't any conflict, which kind of added an additional challenge emotionally to it, which I'll speak on later. So if it is a high conflict separation and divorce that you're going through, then some of the information, you'll require more steps. Let's put it that way. So the things that I'm offering as suggestions, my 15 suggestions to help you process, is still helpful, even when it's high conflict, even when there's children involved. In fact, I'd say there are aspects of what I'm about to share that are very relevant, but it's just not, there's more steps, like I said, to it. So this is not exhaustive, this list, but I do think that it's pretty thorough. And so here we are. I'm going to try to do this video and just speak all the way through. I have my notes here that I took. And even with my notes, they're a little all over the place, but I didn't want to keep rewriting it because I don't want to keep editing myself too much. Because I find that with videos, when it's too much editing, you lose the authenticity of it. So I'm going to try to speak to some degree extemporaneously. Okay. The first step I did was pray. I know that sounds cliche. And for those that do identify with a particular religion, don't identify with organized religion, I actually don't identify with organized religion. So please don't be turned off by this. But this was part of my process. And also the information I'm providing is my personal experience and also professional experience, but most of it's personal. Okay. All right. So like I said, I pray. That's the first step. That's my base. Being able to speak beyond myself, that is helpful to me. So that's the first thing I did. And I continually did that throughout. In my best of moments, in my worst of moments, I always continue to keep that lifeline. That's how I consider it, prayer as a lifeline. Okay, the second thing I did, this is going to be unconventional. Okay, so I need you to tune in. I was going to give this information last, but I'm going to give it second because it's very important. It frames how you feel. Identify what type of victim you are. The reason why I say this is because the type of victim you are determines the type of support you're going to get from your community. And in being able to determine the type of victim you are, it'll help you to adjust your expectations when you don't get a certain type of support. So again, these are things that in hindsight I realized I was doing, which was a good thing, but I'm just putting it on paper for y'all to be able to organize your thoughts. Okay, so I stumbled upon an article a couple years ago, and the author of the article is, I'm going to spell his name. It's Ofer, that's the first name, and the last name is Zur. So Ofer Zur. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly, so forgive me if I haven't. But anyhow, he wrote a paper on rethinking Don't Blame the Victim. The Psychology of Victimhood. And I thought it was a fascinating paper. And this man, Ofer Zur, he has videos online talking about victimhood. And so the reason why I say it's important for you to identify what type of victim you are is that in our society, we tend to only see there's a victim and a perpetrator. It's black and white. So if they're a victim in all aspects of the situation. They are totally innocent. That is not true. When we're speaking about a marriage, we're speaking about, we'll even say even like from a dating perspective, but in mine, since I was married, you have to identify the type of victim you are. And I will tell you one thing's for sure. More than likely, you are not a, as they would call it, a non-guilty innocent victim. Okay, when we're talking about the context of a marriage. So globally, for the most part, if you've been married, you're in a relationship, a consenting relationship, then if the marriage does not work out, neither of you are totally the perpetrator and neither of you are totally victims. So I recognize that I was not an innocent victim in this situation. Okay, so if you're wondering what is an innocent victim, I will give you examples based off of what this author has offered. Children who have been sexually, physically abused or neglected are innocent victims, period. Period. Okay. Rape or murder victims, when a crime is unforeseen, unprovoked, and perpetuated by complete strangers. An innocent victim. Okay? The severely mentally ill or disabled adults who get hurt or exploited. Innocent victims. Victims of random or rampage shootings. Okay? Victims of unexpected natural disasters. Earthquakes in non-earthquake zones. Victims of corporate greed. Those who have perpetuated crime through corporations and who have been victims of it. Those sort of things. Those are non-innocent victims. Okay? So you're like, why are you going into all this? I'm setting the foundation, because if you can identify the type of victim that you are, you will significantly be able to grieve in a way that is grieve in a way that is less intense. It will hurt less for a shorter period of time. Okay, the next victim that this author mentions is victims who share equal responsibility with the perpetrator. Okay, so in this instance, your spouse is not the perpetrator, but this is how it's being labeled in this article. So in this instance, there's an innocent victim. There is a victim who shares equal responsibility with their spouse. So we both got into this marriage. We both did things that did not help the marriage. Or maybe the situation is we both picked the wrong partner. We actively made a choice that was not in our best interest. So we are both to blame. Okay? There are other types of victims. There's victims who bear minor guilt. I don't think that is relevant to a marriage in this instance when we're talking about it ending. So I would say it's more appropriate to say when it comes to victimhood. Or, hold on, there's another one. Victims who share more guilt than the actual person, than their spouse. So you, the person watching, might be more of the perpetrator when it comes to offenses within the marriage. So that's going to be important to identify as well. Okay? So just to organize this, I don't want to bring any confusion. The first thing I did, prayer. The second thing I did was identify which type of victim that I was in this marriage. Okay? So really, there were no victims when it came to my marriage. I would almost say that as far as grievances, maybe we both shared equal responsibility. Okay. But perhaps maybe the responsibility laid more on me. I was more of the offender because I had more particulars that I brought into the marriage, that I and more values that, not saying he didn't have values, but I just had a lot of particulars when it came to my values, and I did not honor them. I set them aside in order to have in order to pursue this relationship and then marriage. There were aspects of us that were in alignment, but there were other parts that were not. And so I made choices that put me out of alignment. And I take responsibility for that. And I bore guilt. I felt a lot of guilt when it came to that. And I had to forgive myself. In fact, that's actually something I didn't even add to my list as far as forgiveness. So there's actually 16 things that one would need to do when it comes to moving on, in a marriage. And so the 16th thing is forgiveness. But we'll speak on that later. Okay. I know it sounds like a lecture, but this is like, just bear with me. When you identify the type of victim that you are or not in the separation and divorce, it will determine whether or not you're going to get a lawyer. Because if you have misperceived your role in conflicts within the separation and divorce, then you're going to see yourself as an innocent victim when more than likely you are not. Again, we are not talking about domestic violence. This is not a domestic violence conversation. That's something different. And even in that, there's still a level of responsibility that both parties bear when it comes to those experiences. But I'm not talking about that. We're talking about just no violence. No violence. Okay. So this will determine whether or not you get a lawyer, the type of lawyer that you get. This will determine the type of story you tell your family and friends. Because if you see yourself as an innocent victim when you are not, your family is going to respond from that energy. And they're going to be the peanut gallery. Or they may dislike you viewing yourself as totally innocent and then turn on you. So it's going to be very important that you have a very reasonable assessment. And some of that assessment may come as you go through the process, but at some point you do need to be able to determine your role in why the marriage did not work. Even if you're 20% at fault when it comes to why the marriage didn't work, it's still 20%. It's still something that it's going to be important for you to take ownership of. When you don't understand your role in conflicts, the type of victim that you were or were not, what it's going to do is it can create bitterness, embitterment, resentment, hatred. It can actually cause violence, at least verbal violence for sure. It can really dysregulate you when you have a belief system that is not true. True meaning the full truth. There might be aspects of truth, but the full truth. So I really want to just make this the foundation. So please be willing to walk in full ownership of your role in the conflict. Don't take on everything, like I said, because it takes two people for a marriage to not work. But there is a role that was played in things not going well. And so I took ownership of that. And so what it did is it allowed us to be able to part in peace. I know that there are times that parting in peace is not an option, but that was an option for me, and I'm grateful for that. And I chose peace, and he chose peace, and we both were very, we were able to both be very mature about it. And I'm grateful for that. However, because of the fact that we did part in peace, it actually added a layer of pain. Because this is someone who I'm very fond of, who I still love, who I get along with, but yet our marriage is no longer going to be sustained. And so I had to come to terms with that. And the other thing that is difficult with that is people are not going to understand when there is no conflict or high conflict. So in their mind, it's like, well, then why are you getting a divorce? And it's like, well, there's personal reasons that I know intuitively, and we know the things that were not in alignment. And so I don't need to go into those details, but it's important for you to know what those things are as you go through your experience. So the third thing I did when it came to processing my separation and divorce, after identifying what type of victim I was in this marriage, which was I really wasn't a victim, and that is to adjust your expectations. Adjust your expectations when it comes to how your family and friends, how your community is going to respond to the news about you being separated and then divorced. When I told my parents, they were very, very upset, understandably, and they began to grieve, and in a way that I could not necessarily help them in. And I realized that if they were to see me going through my own anguish and my very intense grief, for them, it would have dysregulated them. It would have been too much of an issue. And they would have worried about me. And so I wanted to limit the amount of worry that they had for me. I know that as adult children, you can feel that your parents are always going to worry about, and there is going to be a level of concern they're always going to have. However, in my instance, I really knew they would actually worry. And I knew that I was going to be okay. So I gave them enough information for them to know how to proceed, but I didn't go into all of the details. I didn't go into, spilling my guts about all the stuff that I was going through, because I needed to respect their process. So I adjusted my expectations and expecting them to have a level of check-in with me. My parents didn't check in and, call me on a regular basis to see how I was doing. I didn't have that expectation because I knew that they were grieving. And so I didn't expect that for them. So therefore, that was one less thing for me to be disappointed about. Also, they loved him. They still love him. And so therefore, I was not going to get in the way of whatever the relationship was going to be. I felt like it would be selfish if I stopped them from having a relationship with him. I chose to not view it as disloyalty, because it wasn't. It was just they love someone, and when you love someone, you don't just cut it off. So I respected that, and I adjusted my expectations. Something else I want to add, going back to the victim piece, is let's just say you are more of the perpetrator when it comes to offenses in the marriage. Be prepared for your family and friends to be mad at you. Be prepared for them to not give you support. Let's just say the other spouse is lying. That's on them if they want to if they want to lie and have a misperception. But yes, adjust your expectations and know that if there's conflict like that, then you're not going to get the same level of support as you did when you got married. So adjust your expectations. It will save you from a lot of heartache. And essentially, by adjusting your expectations, you're respecting people's boundaries, and when it comes to their grieving process as well. Okay. Number 4, cry. Allow yourself to cry. I had to allow myself to cry. I am a crier anyway, but I really cried. I cried more tears than I ever knew I could cry. I never in my life have cried the way that I did when I was going through my separation. I remember taking the pillowcase off and looking at my pillow, and it just had a huge stain on it. And it was just, I knew it was just tears. I cried so much. I cried at night. I cried and I cried and I cried. And there were times I would be shopping and I would just be crying. And I just couldn't hold it. I just cried and cried. I'd hear certain things and it would just the memory would just come back and I would just cry. And so I have found that when I speak with people sometimes about crying, they'll say, well, I don't want to cry because I feel like they'll essentially feel like they're going to cry forever. And it does kind of feel that way because I didn't cry for a couple of weeks. I didn't cry for a couple of months. I cried for over a year, like a year and a half. I cried every single day. I was able to be functional. I wasn't impaired. I handled my responsibilities. But in between those times when I wasn't having to be in front of people, I was crying. It would be unprovoked. I would just cry. I cried a lot in my vehicle. So many times. And so it's going to be very important that you allow yourself to feel the full range of emotions that happen when you go through cutting off part of yourself with a divorce. It does feel like a death when you go through that situation because, you know, whatever that relationship was, it's never going to be that again. Ever. And so, you know, it's the permanence of it. And so it's just grief is so spiritual. It's a very bizarre, it's just because it's so physical. You just feel it on so many layers of yourself. So don't be afraid of the process. It's going to be very important that you allow yourself to feel when you go through this process, because if you don't, that grief is still going to be there. And it comes out years later. It can come out in rage. It can come out in health issues. You know, I call it being emotionally constipated. So it's very important you allow the natural flow of things. I will say this. There was a time that I wouldn't say I was going to be depressed. I could have fallen into that. But what I did was I started to feel really, really heavy to the point that I felt like I was kind of losing it. And I wasn't impaired, but if I didn't get it together, there could have been some impairment as far as it bleeding into my interactions with people. And so I sat in my car. I had to take a break. And I remember, you know, the scripture, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. I've heard it so much throughout my life, it almost is like cliche. But it took on real meaning for me. And I remember I said a prayer and I said, you know, you said weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And I have been weeping a lot and I need joy. I need this lifted from me. And within that hour, the weight, the heaviness, it came off of me. And I was able to just continue to go on with my responsibilities and be okay. And I'm grateful for that. Okay, so the fifth thing is keeping your process to yourself. So you may need to not announce to family and friends yet that you are going through a separation. Especially if you know that you need to leave. If you know that you need to leave and your concern is if you share with family and friends, they may talk you into staying. It's going to be very important that you don't say anything while you go through this process for a season. There's a certain point where you do need to share with your family, with your community. For myself, I did not share with my extended family that I was going through a separation. They did not find out that I was no longer. They found out basically when I was divorced. That's when they found out. I didn't share it with them. Part of the other reason why I didn't share it with them is because my spouse at the time, he did not share it with his family because that was his process. And I respected that. And so therefore I didn't share really much with anybody out of that. I was okay with that. For other people, maybe that's not going to work for them because maybe their extended family is a really core group of people that gives them emotional support. But for me, I was okay. So you have to feel your way through in this process. Okay. The sixth thing, which can be really challenging, is be mindful of your partner's healing. I know I just said that, but I'm going to go even deeper with that. your partner is going to begin to detach from you. And there are perks that come with being married, right? There's perks to having access, intimate access with someone. And so when the separation begins, some people, in order to grieve, especially men, I find the cutoff begins immediately. It doesn't mean that they love you any less. It just means that's what they need to survive, what they need to get through it, is to become very cold and detached. And so I respected his journey, his journey to grieve, not just the loss of me, but the loss of the role. Like I grieve the loss of being connected to someone, and I grieve the loss of being a wife, because I enjoy being a wife. I enjoyed it. So I had to allow him to detach, and I had to accept the fact that I lost perks. I lost access. From a financial standpoint, I began to really gather myself financially and make sure that I was going to be okay. I had to begin to look more out for my own interests. And that was difficult because I'm used to thinking like we instead of just like me. And so I just had to, it was part of that acceptance piece. If you are tied to certain resources, be prepared for those resources to be taken away. Is it right for them to suddenly take it away, especially if they're the breadwinner? No, but be prepared for that. And don't be devastated if it happens. Just know that it comes with the territory when people are grieving and they're beginning to detach from you. Next step. This is number 6. And that is get reacquainted or find a new hobby. So during this time, I had gained a good amount of weight for myself. It was a good amount of weight, and I needed to lose it. I told myself, as I go through this grieving process, I want to be as healthy as possible. And so I picked up the hobby of boxing, which I'm really grateful for because I ended up finding a friend through that. And then that friend introduced me to other friends. And then I ended up gaining a community of people that I never had access to before. So I just got physically fit. I started to grow my hair out. I just started doing, and that became my new hobby, growing my hair out. You know, having my natural hair out, not having a relaxer. I just started doing more self-care. That's probably the best way I know how to put it. And part of that self-care is self-discovery. It helps you to be forward thinking and not, remain stuck. A part of that self-care and self-discovery is I actually started a business during that time. And I'd always wanted to start a business. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I was able to channel my energy. It wasn't a distraction per se, but it was just taking the energy somewhere else. It was going to go somewhere either way. It was either going to go and just kind of flail around and just cause me to be stuck, or I was going to galvanize it and use it as energy to make something. The other thing I did is I tapped into my creativity as far as music. And I've always been, I've been a songwriter for many, many years. But when I wrote songs, a lot of it was kind of just more so, looking at other people's experiences, global experiences that are common to humanity. But I never really wrote about my own until that moment that I was going through the separation. Fast forwarding some, I remember it was my last week of being in my home that I was used to. Like I said, I made the choice to move out. And so I wrote myself a song. And I would sing it as best as I could. And I would record myself singing it. And then I would just cry. I wouldn't even be able to complete it because it would just be so sad. And then I would sing, after a couple hours, I'd sing a little bit more. And I would get through it. part of the song, and then I would cry some more. I don't even listen to those recordings anymore because they just were, it was too painful, and I'm past that point now. But and I was very grateful for that, and I was grateful that at that time he had to go out of town for work, and so I was able to really process it by myself, the letting go of my home. And so my gifting to write songs, to play an instrument, I used it to bring healing to myself. I had never done that before, and so it gave me a real insight into how your giftings can assist in your healing, whatever that gifting is. It could be, and so whatever it is that you're very skilled in, increase it as you go through the grieving process. And that may seem counterintuitive because you're like, well, I'm sad, I don't want to do stuff. But that's the time you really push through and you can really generate diamonds. It's a great time to be able to create when you are down like that, because you have less, because when you're married, you're connected to someone, you set aside sometimes parts of yourself, and so part of that self-care journey is to rediscover the things that maybe you've left behind or just had neglected when it came to your gifts and talents. And so that's what I did for myself. The other thing of self-care that I did was I started to write. I had been writing before, but I never really wrote enough. And I always wanted to write a book. And the irony was I was able to write a book during this time, and it was about my grieving process. And I will share, for anyone that's interested in the book, I can write it in the description or something. But anyhow, that's what I did, and I was very proud of myself. I hate that it took this type of experience for me to be able to actually complete a book, but such is life. Okay, the next thing I did, number 10, is I had to give myself something to look forward to. Something very small. Because it's just such a sad experience, it can be hard to look ahead. And so I went to Bath and Body Works and I got this, I don't remember what the fragrance was, but it just smelled so good. And I was like, man, I really like this. And I said, you know what? I'm going to buy it and I'm not going to use it yet. And I got a little box and I put the fragrance in the box. And then I went to the grocery store, went to Walmart, and they had a pair of pajamas that were on clearance. They were like maybe $2 or $5. And so I bought that and I said, you know what? This matches the color of the bottle. Let me fold it up, put it in the little box and save it. And then I just started making it a thing where let me make this little pair of pajamas and this spray be a gift to myself, so that when I move out of my home and I'm in my new home, I can open up this box. And in using these products, it reminds me of how far I've come. So it's my new marker. It's my milestone of me. I left and I had the courage. I left the situation. I left the marriage. And then I had this small gift. And so along the way, I would do these things to remind myself of how far I've come. Okay, the next thing I did is taking it day by day. That's step 11. And these things may seem very obvious to do, but when you're in the thick of it, when you're really heavy and you're in those emotions, there can be some anxiety when it comes to not knowing what's going to happen next. I had never really lived independently before. I'd been in this relationship for, many years. I spent my early adult years in this relationship, and so it was my first time kind of being on my own. And so there was some anxiety when it came to that, oh no, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? Am I going to make enough money? Am I going to, where am I going to live? It will become overwhelming. And so I told myself, I'm just going to focus on today. A thing that made me feel anxious was, How is it going to be like when the divorce is actually final? How are we going to interact with each other? Are we going to interact with each other? Like, there was just so much, I just felt so on edge. And so I just kept saying, take it one day at a time. And then as I would take it one day at a time, I would tell myself, you're further along than you were before. And I faced it. I faced the thing that I was feeling so anxious about. I didn't try to prepare for it emotionally, because you can't really prepare when it comes to grief. You feel it day by day, and you just go through it. Okay, step 12. This one I thought was very interesting, and I would only know this going through the experience, and that is, don't be tempted to reconcile. And what I mean by that is, I'm talking about when you know that it's time to sever the relationship. You've made a definitive, you've made the choice, okay? And you've lined up the reasons why. You have a why that's good enough. And so in this instance, there were very specific principles and values that I needed to adhere to in order to move forward, that I wasn't able to properly nurture like I needed to when I was married. Excuse me. So what I mean by don't be tempted to reconcile is, when both people make the decision that the marriage is not going to last, that it's ending, you stop talking about we. You stop talking about things that matter to the us, to the relationship, because it doesn't matter anymore. It's over. It's over. So it can feel peaceful. And we never really argued anyway, but we did talk about things. We would do check-ins with each other. And those things stopped. And so it felt very calm. Like we just interacted with each other just really well. And it can just give a false sense of security. And so I would just encourage you, as you go through the process and you know that I need to move forward, I need to not be with this individual, that you don't get tripped up by that, by the absence of conflict, the absence of, just it seeming peaceful. That doesn't mean that, oh no, that means maybe we should be together, we should try again. No, it just means that there's nothing to invest in anymore. There's nothing to fight for, and that's why it's so still. Okay, the next thing is 13, avoid triggers. So for me, music was a trigger. I love a good romance song. I love I love soul music. I love a good breakup song, until I went through my own breakup. It's different. Breakup songs hit different once you're actually going through it. I could not listen to that type of music at all. None of my favorite music I couldn't listen to. All I could listen to was one song. The entire year and a half of me going through the whole process, one song I could listen to was just one gospel song. And I just listened to it on repeat over and over and over and over and over again. So much so that when I listen to it now, I kind of can't listen to it as much anymore, because it kind of reminds me of that time that I was, and I'm not anymore. I'm better with it now. I can listen to the song and enjoy it, but it's just so intimately attached to that moment of my life, that season. So your triggers for me it was music. For someone else, it might be pictures. I don't know, but you just work to avoid those so that you can continue to go on with the process. The next thing I have, which kind of goes along with the trigger thing, number 14, is begin to let go of keepsakes. I had a lot of them. We were together, many years. Once I got divorced, I did remove all pictures, all media from my phone. I deleted them from my phone, but I did keep them uploaded like in a cloud. It's in an email that I've never opened. Um, I do believe in keeping pictures to a degree, um, especially if it's part of your history, it's part of your story. You can't erase it, but it's no longer needed. It's not relevant anymore to my current life to have, my former wedding picture, you know, things from when we were on vacation. It doesn't serve a purpose anymore. So I had to let go of that. Again, if you delete pictures, I would just encourage you save them somewhere else, especially if you have like children. It's part of their story too, their parents' journey. That it's important for them to not be robbed of that. Um, and pertaining to children, for those that do not want to have pictures of their former significant other in the home, that's fine. But for the children, I do think it's important for them to have some sort of tangible keepsake of their parents, to not deny them of that. That would be very important because you don't want to disrupt their sense of normalcy. But like I said, I don't have children, so therefore that wasn't my part of my story. But I did want to add that caveat. Okay, the next thing is 15. To really just be your best version of self, and I've kind of been touching on that already. Just make sure whatever you have neglected that you now attend to. Whatever area of knowledge you have, increase that knowledge. Whatever area of ignorance that you have, decrease that ignorance and increase the knowledge in that area so that you can gain more insight. I would say also with that, or maybe I would say this is like the part of being your best self, for me, is I also needed to journal. I'm not really that into journaling, but I did journal during my separation, especially in times where I could not share what I was dealing with on the inside with other people. I did not go to therapy. For myself, I knew the things that I needed to do for myself, but for others, if you need to seek professional help, I would encourage it. Especially not going to relatives, because they're going to have more of a bias, especially towards you, because of their love for you. So it's probably best to seek professional help. Excuse me. So when I journaled, it was only during the separation, and I never journaled again after that. I reviewed some of the pages shortly after my divorce, and I actually ended up just tearing the pages up. It was dark, and I'm past that point now. I don't need to reference it again. I know how far I've come. It served its purpose at the time. And the journal I had was actually a guided journal. That was helpful for me because it had writing prompts. So I would encourage you, if you do journaling, to get a guided journal. It can be very constructive. So that was what I did for that season. So the last thing, 16, is to forgive. The F word. I know that's a word that people don't like to use. For me, the forgiveness is forgiving myself because I hurt another person. And I'm a very sensitive, tender-hearted person, and I hate to hurt others. But when you make a choice to merge your life with someone, they are making sacrifices. They are adjusting their world to yours, and I adjusted my world to his, and it disrupts that significantly. And so I felt a lot of guilt about that, and it took me a while to work through that, and I had to really have an active conversation with myself and just say, hey, even as far as certain keepsakes, I felt guilty about letting certain things go because I knew where it came from. I knew that it was genuine when it was given, but for me to be able to move on, certain things I did have to get rid of. An example of that was my wedding dress. And it wasn't like a big poofy dress. It was one of those dresses like I could wear it out in town and people wouldn't know it was my wedding dress. They just wouldn't. They would just be like, oh, okay, she's dressed up. But I knew what it came from, and I no longer wanted to hold on to that. And so almost close to the divorce, I got rid of it. I gave it to the thrift store. For some people, that may not work for them. It may actually put them in distress. So begin to let go of things when you're ready to let go of things. And I was ready to let go. Other things I have kept, not necessarily because it holds sentimental value, but because it served a practical purpose, and it was functional. I used it. It works still, and I don't have any emotional attachment to it. So anything I have now, there's no, oh, it reminds me of this time when he gave it to me. I don't think about it in that way. And things that I do, I no longer have that are like that. So yeah. So back to forgiveness. I knew that I knew that I hurt him. In letting go, I hurt him. He accepted the fact, and he never blamed me for anything. Never tried to make me feel guilty, but I, naturally being a caring person, I just felt bad. And so I forgave myself. And then, for those that are dealing with having offenses towards, their former spouse, I definitely would encourage you to forgive as well. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It's just it's an acceptance. It's letting go of any desire for justice, to punish. And like I said, I didn't pursue. There was no legal conflicts between us. So if it's high conflict and lawyers need to be involved, that's different. That's a different video. There's still even some level of forgiveness eventually that you'll need to get to in order to be able to move forward, so that you don't have any embitterment. But that's a different journey than mine. So those are the 16 things I did to work through my separation and divorce. And I wish y'all well in your journey. If you'd like to reach out to me, you're welcome to email me as far as questions you have, and I'll do the best I can to be helpful. Some things I'm not going to be able to be helpful with, and I'll let you know that, but you are welcome to reach out to me. And that's it. So thank you, and tune in again for another video.